Halloween in the Disney parks is generally cute. Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, Boogie Boogie Bash, they're all about candy, characters, costumes, lighthearted fun. But what if I told you there was a Disney attraction that is seldom talked about, where they actively torture their own characters and even you, the guest? When Disney brought Halloween to Hong Kong, they thought they could do the same thing as they did in their American parks. A family-friendly take on spooky season. But they couldn't have been more wrong, because Hong Kong already had its Halloween heavyweight. The rival across town, Ocean Park, was turning up the dial significantly. Disney was seeing a significant attendance drop at its park as people favored the high scare frights of Ocean Park. The American culture of keeping it low scare didn't translate as well in Hong Kong, so Disney decided to dip their toes into the frightening scare mazes, starting with the Main Street Haunted Hotel. Guests entered a once luxurious hotel that had fallen into decay, haunted by the tortured souls of its guests and staff. It was creepy, unsettling, and for Disney, shockingly intense. Upon stepping into the hotel, guests found themselves in a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The piano plays by itself. As they passed the front desk, a ghostly concierge suddenly appeared, followed by the eerie sight of a disembodied head. Graves Academy took things a little further, a haunted boarding school filled with demented teachers and possessed students. According to legend, Principal Graves was always searching for new students, but enrollment came with a terrifying price. Every corner held something unsettling, and every shadow hinted that something was watching. But inside Disney headquarters, not everyone was thrilled. Some Imagineers wanted to tone it down. The problem, the public didn't. Guests wanted gruesome. They wanted terror. And in 2016, Disney finally gave it to them in the form of the Nightmare Experiment. The experience begins as guests are ushered into the study of Professor Wu. As the group waits, the atmosphere is broken by loud banging, screams, and distressed yells coming from behind the professor's closed office door. The group is then brought into the experimentation chamber to finally meet the man in charge, a cyborg version of Professor Wu. He's surrounded by a complex machinery, and most disturbingly, two lifeless bodies are strapped into a large contraption he calls the Dreamscape machine. Wu activates the device, a portal rips open, a cloud of smoke billows out as guests are quickly hurried through the portal. It transports the guests into a Louisiana bayou where a voodoo performance is being hosted by Dr. Facilier. The show takes an even darker turn as Facilier is suddenly grabbed by a massive black shadow demon, vanishing completely. He rushes the guests through it, leading them into a dark, grim prison cell block. The cells are filled with skeletal remains of tortured pirates. One particularly gruesome scene clearly depicts a skeleton that appears to have hung itself. Escaping the prison, guests find themselves in a nightmarish version of Sid Phillips' room from Toy Story. The area is littered with his infamous mutant deformed and mutilated toys. The scene's main scare comes from a mutated baby doll complete with 6 arms and stitched mouth shut, which suddenly runs over to the guest, begging to be played with. The next room is a twisted Alice in Wonderland, where guests are led by the White Rabbit into a dark asylum inside the Red Queen's castle. Here they find the Mad Hatter trapped inside a cell. In a terrifying moment of live-action theater, the Hatter manages to grab a guest from the audience. He says he hears voices. And then screaming, he lunges at the unsuspecting guest with a large pair of garden shears. And then he lunges at the unsuspecting guest. As the attack happens, the curtains immediately fall and a piercing alarm blares. After finally making it through the maze, guests find themselves back in Professor Wu's laboratory. In 2017, Hong Kong Disneyland brought back its most disturbing experiences. Called The Maze of Madness, the Nightmare Experiment continues. After Professor Wu's arrest, his twisted experiments should have ended, but somehow his mind and his madness became trapped inside a dream world. His assistant sends guests through a new portal to find him, warning them that the professor might be something far worse than human. The nightmare begins in Stromboli's caravan from Pinocchio. Inside a small puppet-filled hut, a grinning clown welcomes guests to the show, but on the tiny stage is Pinocchio. chained, miserable, and forced to perform, where he pleads for help from the crowd. Next comes Monstropolis. Inside the Monsters Inc. scare floor, members of the Child Detection Agency rush toward Boo's door, shouting orders to move quickly. But before anyone can escape, alarms blare and the voice of Roz echoes through the speakers. The world twists again, and this time you are in the Mad Hatter's shop from Alice in Wonderland. The Hatter greets guests with his trademark grin, but it doesn't last long. He selects one unlucky visitor, sits them in a chair, and places a hat on their head. Then his voice turns cold. He mutters that voices are whispering to him, and the guest would look wonderful without a head. He raises his knife, the room plunges into chaos, alarms wail as the scene cuts to black. The mazes were critically acclaimed by horror fans, but caused internal and external brand conflict. In later years, they decided to switch to a more family-friendly story, like Journey to Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas. The Professor Wu storyline and its extreme IP corruption were ultimately retired. It demonstrated that while the market wanted it, the global Disney IP could not sustain an element of tortured characters. A lot of guests that went in their reviews described psychological trauma of seeing Pinocchio chained and the implied violence of the Mad Hatter with the jump scares. The most dedicated and disturbing use of Disney characters for horror happened in this short-lived experiment, and nobody really talks about it. I think that Disney has a lot of IP for horror fans that they could turn, but the psychological trauma of most people relating their favorite characters in horror situations is too much to be handled. So these mazes sit in history, and we will likely never see them again. And the biggest reason is when your brand is built on dreams, the moment you let people see the nightmares, you can never unsee it. Now there's another forgotten ride that's hidden in plain sight at Disneyland that I talked about that ended in disaster. Click that video now and watch that. Make sure you hit subscribe. I'll see you next time, pals.